The crystal spires of the draconian palace gleamed under 3 crimson suns, but inside the royal nursery, chaos reigned. Another nanny fled screaming down the obsidian corridors, her silver robe singed and her dignity in tatters. The delicate chiming of the palace bells could barely mask the sounds of destruction coming from the nursery wing. Supreme Counselor Thys slithered through the halls, her serpentine lower body moving with practiced grace despite her mounting frustration. As the highest-ranking advisor to the sovereign, she had witnessed many crises in her 3 centuries of service, but nothing quite like this. The royal hatchlings were proving to be more challenging than anyone had anticipated. The nursery doors, crafted from rare moonstone and reinforced with quantum shields, bore fresh scorch marks. Through the translucent barrier, Thys could see the aftermath of the morning's latest incident. Furniture lay overturned, ancient tapestries smoldered, and in the center of it all, 3 small dragonlings played with what appeared to be the remains of a feeding apparatus. Prince Zephyr, the eldest at barely 6 months, was no larger than a house cat, but possessed the destructive potential of a plasma cannon. His scales shimmered between deep emerald and molten gold, and his eyes held an intelligence that was both remarkable and terrifying. When he breathed, small jets of superheated plasma escaped his nostrils, leaving scorch marks on everything within reach. Princess Luna, his sister, had developed the disturbing ability to phase through solid matter at will. Her silvery scales seemed to absorb light, making her appear as a shifting shadow. She delighted in appearing suddenly behind unsuspecting caretakers, often while they were handling delicate equipment or precious artifacts. More than one priceless relic had been shattered by startled nannies. The youngest, Prince Cosmos, was perhaps the most unsettling of all. His scales were deep purple, almost black, and seemed to contain swirling galaxies within their depths. He had demonstrated the ability to manipulate gravity in small, localized fields, causing objects to float, fall upward, or suddenly become impossibly heavy. Yesterday, he had made an entire wall temporarily weightless, causing it to drift toward the ceiling before crashing down when his attention wandered. The previous nanny, a veteran caretaker who had successfully raised the young of 3 different royal houses, had lasted exactly 4 days. Before her, a series of increasingly desperate candidates had attempted the position. Military trainers, seasoned diplomats, even a former gladiator champion, had all failed to manage the royal offspring for more than a week. Thys activated the communication panel beside the nursery entrance. "Report," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of her position. A trembling voice responded from within. "Supreme Counselor, we've had another incident. The feeding mechanism has been compromised. Prince Zephyr appears to have disagreed with the nutritional pace selection and expressed his displeasure thermally." Princess Luna then phased through the containment field and began redistributing the contents across the chamber. Prince Cosmos found this amusing and reduced the gravitational constant in a 3-meter radius, causing the paste to form floating spheres that subsequently adhered to the ceiling when normal gravity resumed. Thys closed her eyes and tried to summon patience. The sovereign was currently engaged in crucial negotiations with the Galactic Council, attempting to secure trade agreements that would benefit their empire for generations. The last thing the realm needed was for word to spread that the royal heirs were driving their caretakers to madness. "Where is the current nanny?" Thys inquired, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Nurse Vex departed approximately 10 minutes ago, Supreme Counselor. She mentioned something about transferring to the military corps and requesting immediate deployment to the front lines of the Outer Rim conflicts. She seemed to feel that facing hostile alien war fleets would be less stressful than her current assignment." Thys sighed, a sound that came out as a soft hiss through her serpentine features. This was the 12th nanny in as many weeks. The Royal Employment Bureau had officially declared the position hazardous duty and was requiring combat pay for any further applicants. Even then, qualified candidates were becoming increasingly scarce. The problem wasn't that the dragonlings were malicious. Quite the opposite, in fact. They were remarkably intelligent and affectionate, but their natural abilities were developing far more rapidly than their emotional control. A moment of excitement could result in localized property damage. A fit of frustration might accidentally breach dimensional barriers, and their idea of play often involved energies and forces that could level city blocks. Through the observation window, Thys watched as Prince Zephyr attempted to show affection to a toy by breathing gently on it. The gentle breath reduced the toy to a small pile of ash, causing the prince to make soft mewling sounds of distress. Princess Luna, trying to comfort her brother, accidentally phased partially through him, causing both of them to become temporarily incorporeal and drift through the floor. Prince Cosmos, not wanting to be left out, reduced his own gravity and floated up to join them, leaving the nursery completely empty for several concerning minutes. The children were clearly lonely and craving attention, but their very nature made them nearly impossible to care for safely. Traditional draconian nannies, while experienced with young dragons, were not equipped to handle offspring with such unprecedented abilities. The royal bloodline had apparently undergone some kind of evolutionary leap, and the children represented something entirely new in their species' development. Thys made a decision that she hoped she wouldn't regret. Opening her communicator, she sent a priority message to the Galactic Employment Exchange. If traditional approaches weren't working, perhaps it was time to consider unconventional solutions. The galaxy was vast, containing thousands of species with different approaches to child rearing. Surely somewhere among the stars was a caretaker capable of managing 3 remarkable but destructive dragonlings. What she didn't expect was that the solution would come from one of the galaxy's youngest and most underestimated species. The humans had only recently achieved interstellar travel and were still considered primitive by most galactic standards. But sometimes, Thys would soon learn, primitive approaches were exactly what sophisticated problems required. The response to the Galactic Employment Exchange posting was overwhelming, but not in the way Thys had hoped. Most applicants withdrew their applications immediately upon learning the specific requirements. Those who remained were either clearly unqualified or demanded compensation packages that would bankrupt a small planet. That's when she received an unusual communication from Terra, the human homeworld. The message was simple, almost crude by galactic standards, but something about its directness caught her attention. Heard you need someone for difficult children. Have experience. Available immediately. Requesting transport for family unit. The attached credentials were modest, but intriguing. Sarah Chen, a human female, had spent 15 years working in what humans called special needs education. Her record showed consistent success with children exhibiting challenging behaviors, though nothing quite like plasma breath or gravity manipulation. More interesting was her request to bring her own infant child. Most species would never consider bringing their offspring into such a dangerous situation, but humans, Thys had learned, often had unconventional approaches to problem solving. Their species was known throughout the galaxy for their adaptability and their strange ability to form emotional bonds with almost any other sentient being. Perhaps this human's unusual request wasn't a liability, but an asset. The interview was conducted via subspace communication, with significant translation delays due to the distance between Earth and the Draconian Empire. Sarah appeared on the holographic display as a woman of medium height with dark hair, pulled back practically in kind but determined eyes. In her arms, she held a small human infant who couldn't have been more than a few months old. Mrs. Chen, Thys began, her translator converting her sibilant speech into standard galactic common. I must be frank about the nature of this position. These are not ordinary children. They possess abilities that have proven dangerous to their caretakers. Sarah nodded calmly. I've worked with children who could hurt others without meaning to. Sometimes it's because they're stronger than they realize, sometimes because they can't communicate their needs properly. From what I understand, your little ones have both problems. The previous caretakers have suffered burns, gravitational displacement, and what can only be described as minor dimensional incidents, Thys continued. Are you certain you understand the risks involved? Ma'am, I once had a student who could accidentally generate electromagnetic pulses when he got excited. Another girl could influence people's emotions without realizing it, causing panic attacks in her classmates. Every child is different, but the principles remain the same. They need structure, understanding, and most importantly, they need to know that someone cares about them as individuals, not just as problems to be solved. Thys found herself impressed by the human's calm confidence. And your infant? Surely you don't intend to expose your own child to such dangers? Sarah's expression softened as she looked down at the baby in her arms. Emma is why I think this might work. Children often respond better to other children than they do to adults. They're less threatening, more relatable. And from what I've read about your species, dragons have strong pack instincts. They might accept a baby more readily than they would another adult caretaker. It was an interesting theory, though Thys worried about the ethics of using an infant as a therapeutic tool. What makes you think this approach would be successful where others have failed? Because everyone else has been trying to control them, Sarah replied simply. That's the natural response when dealing with dangerous abilities. But children don't usually respond well to control, especially not gifted children. They respond to guidance, to feeling understood, and to having their emotional needs met. The human shifted her baby to one arm and pulled up a holographic display showing various images and videos. I've studied the reports you provided. Prince Zephyr's plasma incidents correlate with feeding times and social interaction periods. He's not being destructive on purpose. He's trying to communicate. Princess Luna's phasing seems to happen when she's seeking attention or feeling excluded. And Prince Cosmos's gravity manipulation appears to be his way of trying to join in activities that his siblings are doing. Thys realized she was holding her breath. In all the reports and meetings about the royal children, no one had looked at their abilities as communication, rather than simply destructive behavior. They're lonely, Sarah continued. They have incredible gifts, but no one who understands them. Every adult they meet is afraid of what they can do instead of seeing who they are. That would make any child act out. The logic was sound, but Thys still had concerns. Mrs. Chen, with respect to your expertise, these children can level buildings. Your approach may be correct in theory, but the practical applications— May I ask you something? Sarah interrupted gently. When you were a child, did you ever have an accident when you were upset or excited? Knocked something over? Maybe broke something precious? Thys considered the question. Of course, all children do. Now imagine if every time you got upset, instead of someone helping you clean up and teaching you to be more careful, they ran away screaming. Imagine if adults talked about you like you were a dangerous weapon instead of a child learning to control their body. How would that make you feel? The insight struck Thys like a physical blow. The royal children weren't monsters. They were babies with extraordinary abilities and no one who understood how to help them develop emotional regulation. Every failed caretaker had reinforced their sense of isolation and otherness. The salary we discussed, Thys said carefully. It includes hazard pay, but I want to ensure you understand that this position comes with significant risks. Sarah smiled for the first time during the interview. Ma'am, I've been a teacher for 15 years. I'm used to hazard pay. Despite herself, Thys found the corner of her mouth twitching upward. Humans had a remarkable ability to find humor in serious situations. Very well. We'll arrange transport immediately. I do hope you know what you're getting into. Probably not, Sarah admitted cheerfully. But that's never stopped me before. As the communication ended, Thys realized she felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Perhaps what the royal children needed wasn't a caretaker who could withstand their abilities, but one who could see past them to the lonely, confused children underneath. Within hours, a draconian transport ship was dispatched to Earth. As Thys watched the ship's departure on the palace's long-range sensors, she found herself offering a prayer to the ancient dragon spirits. Either this human woman was exactly what the royal family needed, or Thys was about to become responsible for an interspecies incident that would echo through galactic history. Only time would tell which possibility would prove true. The transport ship arrived at the Draconian Palace 3 days later, during what the staff had begun calling the quiet hour, the brief period each afternoon when the royal children typically napped, assuming they hadn't completely exhausted themselves with their morning activities. Thys personally met Sarah and her infant daughter at the docking bay, flanked by a full security detail and several medical technicians. The precautions weren't for the humans' protection, but rather to ensure that if something went catastrophically wrong in the nursery, help would be immediately available. Sarah stepped off the transport wearing simple, practical clothing that looked almost primitive compared to the elaborate robes and technological garments worn by the palace staff. Her baby Emma was wrapped in what appeared to be a hand-woven blanket, a stark contrast to the quantum-regulated environmental suits typically used for infant care in advanced civilizations. Mrs. Chen, Thais greeted her formally. Welcome to the Draconian Palace. I trust your journey was comfortable. Please call me Sarah, and yes, your people were very kind. Emma slept most of the way. Sarah looked around the magnificent docking bay with obvious appreciation but no hint of intimidation. This is incredible. The architecture is beautiful. Most beings meeting the Supreme Counselor for the first time displayed some combination of fear, awe, or diplomatic caution. Sarah's genuine warmth and apparent lack of concern about species differences was refreshing, if somewhat startling. Before we proceed to the nursery, Thais said, I feel obligated to brief you once more on the specific challenges you'll be facing. Since our communication, there have been 3 additional incidents. The children managed to create what our scientists can only describe as a localized temporal distortion. Yesterday afternoon, nothing was permanently damaged, but several palace guards experienced the same 30 seconds approximately 17 times before normal chronology resumed. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Sounds like they were trying to extend playtime. Were they engaged in an activity they particularly enjoyed when it happened? They were playing with a musical toy, yes. How did you know? Children often try to make good experiences last longer. If they figured out how to manipulate time, even accidentally, it makes sense they'd use it to extend something fun. Sarah shifted Emma to her other arm. It's actually quite clever when you think about it. Thais stared at the human woman. Where others saw dangerous anomalies, Sarah saw childhood logic. It was either brilliant insight or dangerous naivety. The walk to the nursery wing took them through several of the palace's most magnificent corridors. Sarah admired the artwork and architecture, asking thoughtful questions about draconian history and culture. Her genuine interest seemed to put the staff at ease, despite their nervousness about her impending assignment. One more thing, Thais said as they approached the nursery doors. The children haven't had any caretaker contact for the past 2 days. They may be particularly energetic. As if summoned by her words, a low rumbling emanated from behind the reinforced doors, followed by what sounded like small explosions and the distinctive whine of gravitational fields fluctuating wildly. Sarah listened to the sounds for a moment, then smiled. They know we're here. They're excited. She looked down at Emma, who had begun making soft cooing sounds. Emma's excited too. Babies are very good at sensing other children. Mrs. Sarah, Thais corrected herself. Are you certain you want to proceed? We could arrange for you to observe from the monitoring station first, perhaps develop a gradual introduction plan. That's kind of you, but I think a direct approach would be better. They've had too many people studying them and not enough people actually spending time with them. Sarah straightened her shoulders. Besides, Emma and I are used to jumping into new situations. Thais activated the door controls and the quantum shields disengaged with a soft chime. The nursery beyond was in its usual state of controlled chaos. Furniture floated at various heights throughout the room, some pieces slowly rotating in defiance of physics. Scorch marks decorated the walls in artistic patterns, and several toys appeared to be phasing in and out of visibility. In the center of it all, 3 small dragonlings looked up at the opening door with bright, intelligent eyes. Prince Zephyr immediately began making excited chirping sounds, small puffs of superheated air escaping his nostrils. Princess Luna flickered between solid and translucent, her agitation causing her phasing ability to fluctuate rapidly. Prince Cosmos reduced his gravitational field, causing himself to float upward while pulling several nearby objects into orbit around his small form. Any rational being would have assessed the situation as immediately dangerous and retreated. Sarah walked calmly into the room. "Hello, beautiful ones," she said softly, her voice carrying the special tone that experienced caregivers develop when speaking to distressed children. "I'm Sarah, and this is Emma. We've come to spend time with you." The effect was immediate and remarkable. Prince Zephyr's excited breathing shifted to curious sniffing. Princess Luna solidified completely, tilting her head to study the newcomers. Prince Cosmos gently returned to normal gravity, allowing his orbital toys to settle harmlessly to the floor. What happened next would be discussed in xenobiology journals for decades to come. Emma, still wrapped in her simple blanket, began making the soft babbling sounds that human infants use to communicate. The three dragonlings responded immediately, moving closer with obvious fascination. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor, placing Emma in her lap where all three royal children could see her clearly. "This is Emma," Sarah said, speaking to the dragonlings as if they could understand every word. "She's still very little like you. She's learning about the world just like you are." Prince Zephyr approached first, extending his neck to sniff delicately at the human infant. His nostrils flared, but only normal air emerged. No superheated plasma, no destructive energy. Emma reached out with one tiny hand, grasping at the emerald scales within reach. Princess Luna flickered once, then became solidly visible as she moved to Emma's other side. She seemed mesmerized by the baby's different appearance, the lack of scales, the small size, the alien but somehow familiar scent of another infant. Prince Cosmos simply settled nearby, his dark scales shimmering with contained starlight as he watched the interaction with intense curiosity. For the first time in months, the royal nursery was completely quiet except for the soft sounds of babies examining each other with innocent fascination. From the doorway, This watched in amazement as the three most difficult children in the galaxy became utterly captivated by a simple human infant. No containment fields, no protective barriers. No fear, just one baby meeting three others, with a calm human woman facilitating the introduction. "Impossible," whispered one of the medical technicians. Thys silently agreed, but she was beginning to understand that where humans were concerned, impossible might be a relative concept. Over the following days, Sarah established routines that seemed impossible by all conventional wisdom. She brought Emma into the nursery every morning, creating what she called baby time, periods when all four infants could interact safely under her careful supervision. The transformation was gradual but undeniable. Prince Zephyr, who had previously expressed excitement or frustration through destructive plasma bursts, learned to moderate his breathing around Emma. When the human baby would reach for his scales, he would carefully control his internal temperature, ensuring that his natural heat wouldn't harm the fragile human infant. Thys observed these sessions from the monitoring station, taking detailed notes that she knew would revolutionize their understanding of royal development. Sarah had explained that human children learned emotional regulation, partly through interaction with other children, and it appeared that dragonling development followed similar patterns. "Emma is teaching them control," Sarah explained during one of their daily briefings. "Not through rules or punishment, but through motivation. They want to be gentle with her, so they're learning to be gentle. It's intrinsic rather than imposed." Princess Luna had become particularly fascinated with Emma's solid permanent form. The dragonling would spend long periods studying how Emma moved through space without shifting between dimensions, occasionally attempting to maintain complete solidity for extended periods. Her phasing incidents dropped from dozens per day to only occasional flickering when she became overly excited. "She's learning that being solid has advantages," Sarah noted. "When she's incorporeal, she can't touch Emma properly, can't interact with toys in the same way. She's choosing to remain physical because it's more rewarding." Prince Cosmos presented the most interesting development. His gravity manipulation, once chaotic and unpredictable, was becoming increasingly sophisticated. Sarah had noticed that he was using his abilities to help Emma, creating small gravitational fields to bring toys within the human baby's reach, or gently lifting objects that Emma had dropped. "He's learning to use his gift purposefully," Sarah observed. "Instead of just manipulating gravity randomly, he's discovering that it can be a tool for helping others. That's giving him both control and motivation to develop precision." The breakthrough came during the second week. During what would later be remembered as the floating bottle incident, Emma had become fussy during feeding time, and Sarah was attempting to comfort her while keeping an eye on the dragonlings. Prince Zephyr had been showing signs of agitation. His breathing was becoming warmer, and small wisps of steam were beginning to curl from his nostrils. In the past, such signs would have prompted immediate evacuation protocols. Instead, Sarah gently picked up Emma and approached the young prince. "Zephyr, sweetheart, Emma is upset because she's hungry. Do you think you could help me warm her bottle just a little bit?" The request was unprecedented. No one had ever asked the dragonlings to use their abilities constructively. Previous caretakers had focused entirely on suppression and control. Prince Zephyr tilted his small head, considering the request. Sarah held up Emma's feeding bottle, explaining simply, "Emma needs this to be warm, but not too warm. Can you help me make it just right for her?" What happened next was captured by the monitoring equipment and would be analyzed by xenobiologists for generations. Prince Zephyr approached the bottle carefully, extending his neck toward it. Instead of the usual violent burst of superheated plasma, he exhaled a gentle, controlled stream of warm air. The temperature sensors registered a precise increase to exactly optimal feeding temperature. Emma immediately calmed as Sarah began feeding her the perfectly warmed bottle. Prince Zephyr made soft, pleased chirping sounds, his chest swelling with obvious pride at having successfully helped the human infant. "Good job, Zephyr," Sarah praised warmly. "You helped Emma feel better. That was very kind of you." The psychological impact was profound. For the first time in his short life, Prince Zephyr had used his abilities to help rather than accidentally harm. The positive reinforcement was immediate and meaningful. Princess Luna, witnessing her brother's success, began experimenting with controlled uses of her phasing ability. She discovered that she could retrieve toys that had fallen into small spaces by becoming incorporeal, phasing through furniture to collect items that Emma had dropped during play sessions. Prince Cosmos, not to be outdone, began using precise gravitational manipulation to create gentle floating entertainments for Emma. Toys that danced slowly through the air, always within the human baby's visual range but never close enough to be dangerous. The palace staff watched these developments with a mixture of amazement and disbelief. The same children who had terrorized a dozen professional caretakers were learning advanced control techniques simply because they wanted to interact safely with a human infant. "It's remarkable," this admitted during a formal review session. "Their development rate has accelerated exponentially, but their destructive incidents have decreased by over 90%. Sarah nodded, gently rocking Emma as she spoke. "Children need purpose. They need to feel useful and valued for who they are, not just contained because of what they can do. Emma gives them that purpose. They're not dangerous monsters to be managed. They're big siblings learning to take care of someone smaller than themselves." The implications extended beyond the royal nursery. If dragonling development could be accelerated through social interaction and purposeful use of their abilities, it might revolutionize how their entire species approached child rearing. The traditional isolation methods designed to prevent accidents might actually be counterproductive. "Mrs. Chen," this said formally, "I believe you may have inadvertently solved one of our species' greatest developmental challenges." Sarah smiled, looking down at Emma, who was contentedly babbling while 3 young dragonlings arranged toys around her in careful, gentle patterns. "I think they solved it themselves. I just gave them a reason to want to." As if summoned by the conversation, Prince Zephyr approached Sarah and made a soft, questioning sound. He had learned that this particular vocalization usually resulted in positive attention. "What is it, sweetheart?" Sarah asked. Prince Zephyr gently breathed on his own toy, warming it slightly, then carefully nudged it toward Emma with his nose. He was sharing, offering his favorite plaything to the human infant who had taught him that his fire could warm instead of burn. In that simple gesture, the future of 2 species shifted toward something brighter and more hopeful than anyone had dared imagine. As weeks passed, the relationship between Emma and the dragonlings evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history. What had begun as simple interaction between infants developed into a complex social bond that defied every conventional understanding of interspecies relationships. Emma, now spending most of her waking hours in the royal nursery, began displaying developmental acceleration that fascinated human and draconian scientists alike. Exposed to the dragonling's advanced cognitive abilities and problem-solving skills, she was reaching developmental milestones weeks ahead of typical human schedules. More remarkably, she seemed to be developing an intuitive understanding of draconian body language and vocalizations. When Prince Zephyr would make his soft questioning chirp, Emma would babble responsively. When Princess Luna flickered with uncertainty, Emma would reach toward her with obvious concern. When Prince Cosmos floated objects in playful patterns, Emma would clap and laugh, encouraging his displays. "She's learning their emotional language," Sarah explained to the assembled court scientists during a formal presentation. "Human infants are remarkably adaptable to social cues from any species. Emma doesn't see them as alien. She sees them as family." The dragonling's response to Emma was equally profound. They had begun displaying protective behaviors that were typically seen only in adult dragons defending their territory or offspring. When palace staff approached too quickly or made sudden movements near Emma, all three dragonlings would immediately position themselves between the perceived threat and the human infant. This protective instinct led to what the palace historians would later call the first lesson in interspecies diplomacy. A delegation of trade representatives from the Crystalline Confederation had requested an audience with the sovereign. As part of the tour, they asked to observe the royal children. Having heard rumors about their remarkable development under human care, Sarah had agreed to the visit, confident that the dragonlings were now calm enough to handle strangers. What she hadn't anticipated was the crystalline tendency to move with sharp, angular motions that their physiology required but which the dragonlings interpreted as aggressive. The moment the first crystalline representative entered the nursery and made a rapid gesture toward Emma, all three dragonlings reacted with coordinated precision. Prince Zephyr positioned himself directly in front of Emma, his breathing immediately shifting to combat temperature. Princess Luna flickered rapidly between dimensions, becoming a shifting, threatening shadow. Prince Cosmos manipulated the gravitational field around the visitors, making them suddenly feel 3 times their normal weight. Protective response, Sarah said calmly to the alarmed delegation, making no move to interfere with the dragonlings' behavior. They perceive your movement patterns as threatening to Emma. If you move slowly and keep your gestures small, they'll calm down. The lead crystalline representative, a being of living mineral who had negotiated with dozens of species, found himself immobilized by a 6-month-old dragon who was manipulating fundamental forces with emotional motivation. "This is unprecedented," he managed to say through his species' harmonic communication method. "Children protecting someone they love," Sarah replied simply. "It's actually quite common across most species." She gently picked up Emma, holding her where the dragonlings could see she was safe. "It's okay, babies. These are friends. They won't hurt Emma." The shift was immediate. Prince Zephyr's breathing returned to normal temperature, though he remained alert. Princess Luna solidified but stayed close to Emma's position. Prince Cosmos gradually returned gravitational fields to normal, though he kept several small objects floating nearby, ready to use as defensive projectiles if needed. "Remarkable," breathed one of the crystalline scientists. "They respond to emotional context rather than just perceived threat. Their defensive protocols include social assessment." After the delegation left, Sarah found herself summoned to meet with the sovereign himself. The massive dragon, ancient beyond human comprehension, received her in his private chambers rather than the formal throne room. Sarah Chen of Terra, his voice resonated through translators that struggled to convey the depth and power of his communication. "You have accomplished something that our greatest minds believed impossible. I just listened to what the children needed." "Your Majesty," Sarah replied, still holding Emma, who seemed utterly unimpressed by the presence of one of the galaxy's most powerful beings. "You have done far more than that," the sovereign continued. "You have given my children something I feared they would never possess, the ability to form emotional bonds outside their immediate family. They have claimed your offspring as part of their pack structure." Sarah looked down at Emma, who was babbling contentedly and reaching toward the massive dragon with no sign of fear. "Emma has claimed them too. She gets upset if we're separated from them for too long. This bond," the sovereign said thoughtfully, "represents possibilities that could reshape how our species interact with the galaxy. My children are learning not just control but empathy. They are developing emotional intelligence that typically takes decades to acquire." Over the following days, the implications of this accelerated development became clear. The dragonlings began demonstrating problem-solving abilities that surpassed expectations for their age group. More importantly, they were learning to consider the needs and limitations of other beings when using their abilities. Prince Zephyr developed the ability to create warming zones of precise temperature, perfect for creatures who needed more heat than the palace's standard environment provided. Princess Luna learned to phase selectively, becoming incorporeal only in specific body parts to reach through barriers while maintaining tactile contact with those around her. Prince Cosmos mastered gravitational fields so precise he could make falling objects float gently to soft landings, rather than crashing to the floor. They're not just learning control, Sarah observed during her daily reports. Their learning consideration. Emma has taught them that their abilities affect others, and they care about those effects. The most significant development came when Emma began attempting her first words. Human infants typically began speaking around 12 months, but Emma, surrounded by the complex vocalizations of young dragons, was experimenting with sounds at 8 months. Her first clear word wasn't mama or dada as might be expected. It was a perfect reproduction of Prince Zephyr's questioning chirp. The moo sound brought all 3 dragonlings immediately to her side, and Prince Zephyr responded with delighted chirping that could only be interpreted as conversation. Emma babbled back in a mixture of human sounds and draconian vocalizations, while the dragonlings listened with the intense attention of siblings trying to understand their baby sister's first attempts at communication. She's becoming bilingual, Sarah realized with wonder, not just in language but in species communication patterns. Thais, documenting the moment for the historical records, could only nod in amazement. In less than 2 months, a human infant had accomplished what centuries of diplomatic protocol had never achieved: true interspecies communication based on emotional understanding rather than formal translation. The bond between Emma and the dragonlings was creating something entirely new in galactic civilization. It wasn't just friendship or alliance. It was family, chosen and cherished across the boundaries of biology and species origin. And it was only the beginning. The transformation in the royal nursery had not gone unnoticed by the broader galactic community. Word of the impossible success with the dragonling heirs spread through diplomatic channels, scientific journals, and unofficial gossip networks with equal speed. The Draconian Empire, previously known for its military might and territorial ambitions, was suddenly being discussed as a potential model for interspecies childcare. Development delegations from across the galaxy requested permission to observe what was being called the Terra Protocol, though Sarah insisted it wasn't a protocol at all, just common sense applied with patience and love. The Andromedan Collective sent their finest developmental psychologists. The Centauri Federation dispatched specialists in interspecies communication. Even the notoriously secretive Void Dwellers emerged from their dimensional hiding places to study the phenomenon. Each group arrived expecting to find some revolutionary technology or advanced scientific method. Instead, they discovered a human woman sitting on the floor of a nursery, encouraging 4 babies to play together while speaking to them in the gentle, patient tone that caregivers had used across species for millennia. There must be more to it, insisted Dr. HFY, the lead researcher from the Andromedan Collective. Our preliminary scans show impossible developmental acceleration in all subjects. The complexity of their social bonding patterns exceeds our most advanced models. Sarah, gently helping Emma stack blocks while Prince Zephyr carefully warmed them to optimal temperature, and Princess Luna phased through the pile to add supports from inside, looked up with mild confusion. I'm not sure what you mean. They're just playing together. But the precision of their ability control, Dr. HFY persisted, the coordination of their cooperative behaviors. The evidence suggests cognitive development rates that should be physically impossible. Children learn fast when they're motivated, Sarah replied simply. She pointed to where Prince Cosmos was using minute gravitational adjustments to help Emma balance a particularly tall tower of blocks. Cosmos isn't thinking about gravitational field theory. He's thinking about helping his little sister succeed at something that's important to her. The visiting scientists documented everything, but their reports invariably struggled to explain how such profound results could emerge from such simple methods. Advanced civilizations across the galaxy had developed complex theories about optimal development conditions, technological assistance for ability control, and sophisticated environmental management systems. None of them had considered that the solution might be as basic as giving children someone to care about. The breakthrough that would change galactic civilization forever came during Emma's first birthday celebration. Sarah had planned a simple party in the nursery, with decorations and a small cake that she'd taught the palace kitchen staff to prepare, according to human traditions. The 3 dragonlings had been excited about the celebration for days, understanding that it marked an important milestone for their cherished human sister. They had been practicing special demonstrations of their abilities as gifts for Emma. Prince Zephyr had learned to create small, controlled flames that danced in beautiful patterns without generating heat. Purely decorative fire that delighted Emma without any risk of burns. Princess Luna had mastered the art of selective phasing, making toys appear and disappear in simple magic tricks that made Emma clap and giggle. Prince Cosmos had developed the ability to make Emma herself gently float, giving her the sensation of flying while keeping her completely safe within his gravitational control. The party was attended by Sarah, Emma, the 3 dragonlings, and a handful of palace staff. The monitoring systems were recording as usual, but no one expected anything more significant than a pleasant family celebration. Then Emma spoke, her first complete sentence she was reaching for a toy that Prince Zephyr had just warmed for her when she clearly said, "Thank you, Zephyr." The words were perfectly pronounced in both human English and Draconian Standard, simultaneously translated through some kind of instinctive linguistic bridge that shouldn't have existed. Prince Zephyr's response was immediate and unmistakable. "You're welcome, Emma, sister." The dragonling had spoken in perfect human English. The room fell silent except for the soft sounds of the recording equipment. Princess Luna, not to be outdone, flickered between visible and translucent as she said, "Happy birthday, Emma, sister," in careful but clear human pronunciation. Prince Cosmos, floating gently near the ceiling, added his own contribution. "We love you, Emma, sister." Emma clapped and babbled happily, responding in her unique mixture of human and draconian sounds that all 4 children seemed to understand. "Perfectly, impossible," whispered one of the monitoring technicians. But Sarah was smiling through tears she didn't realize she was shedding. "Not impossible," she said softly. "Inevitable. When children love each other enough, they find ways to communicate. Language barriers don't mean much to siblings." The recording of Emma's birthday party was transmitted across the galaxy within hours. Linguists struggled to explain how children barely a year old had achieved fluent bilingual communication without formal instruction. Xenobiologists theorized about unprecedented neural adaptation. Psychologists proposed new models of emotional bonding that transcended species boundaries. Meanwhile, in the royal nursery, 4 children continued playing together as if nothing remarkable had happened. The implications rippled through galactic civilization like waves from a dropped stone. If children from radically different species could form such profound bonds, what did that mean for the future of interspecies relations? If language and cultural barriers could be overcome through simple emotional connection, how might that change diplomatic protocols, trade negotiations, and conflict resolution? The Galactic Council called an emergency session to discuss what they termed the draconian phenomenon. Representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered to debate the significance of 4 babies who had accidentally demonstrated that the galaxy's most challenging barriers might be artificial constructs rather than fundamental limitations. But the most significant change was much simpler and more personal. Word spread through unofficial channels that the Draconian Empire was accepting applications for a new type of cultural exchange program. Families from across the galaxy began requesting permission to bring their children for extended visits, hoping that their offspring might experience the same miraculous development. The royal nursery was expanded into a wing, then a complex, then an entire section of the palace, dedicated to what was officially called interspecies developmental research, but which everyone simply knew as playing together. Sarah found herself the director of the most sought-after childcare program in galactic history, though she insisted her title should simply be head babysitter. "All we did," she told the endless stream of reporters and researchers, "was let children be children together. The rest just followed naturally." Emma, now walking and chattering in 3 languages, tottered between her dragon siblings with the confident assumption that this was how all families worked. To her, having siblings who could breathe fire, phase through walls, and manipulate gravity was simply normal. And perhaps, in the growing network of interspecies families that began forming across the galaxy, it would become exactly that, the new normal for a universe learning that love truly was a universal language. 5 years later, the Draconian Palace had become the unofficial center of galactic childhood development research. What began as a desperate attempt to manage 3 difficult dragonlings had evolved into the most successful interspecies integration program in recorded history. Emma, now 6 years old, moved through the expanded nursery complex with the easy confidence of someone who had never known a world where differences between species mattered. She spoke fluently in 17 languages, not because she had studied them, but because her extended family of adopted siblings represented dozens of different worlds. Prince Zephyr, Princess Luna, and Prince Cosmos were no longer the terrifying prodigies who had driven away countless caretakers. They had become beloved big brothers not just to Emma, but to nearly 100 children from across the galaxy who had joined what was now called the Palace family. "Emma, sister, help me with the little ones," Prince Zephyr called in his now mature voice. At 5 years old, he had grown to the size of a large dog and possessed fire control so precise he could warm bottles for infant visitors without even conscious thought. Emma hurried over to where Zephyr was gently breathing warm air over feeding bottles for 3 newly arrived infants, a Centauri crystal child, a small Andromedan, and a tiny being from the Spiral Arms whose species name was unpronounceable in most languages. "The crystal baby needs cooler temperature," Emma reminded him, checking the bottles with the practiced expertise of someone who had been helping with childcare since she could walk. Their metabolisms run differently. Zephyr adjusted his breathing automatically, having learned long ago to calibrate his abilities for dozens of different species requirements. Princess Luna materialized beside them, having just returned from retrieving toys that had fallen into spaces too small for solid beings to reach. "The transport from the outer rim just arrived," Luna reported, her phasing ability now so controlled she could shift only her voice to different dimensional frequencies, allowing her to communicate privately when needed. 3 more families joining the program. Prince Cosmos floated down from the ceiling where he had been adjusting lighting fixtures to optimal levels for various species' visual requirements. His gravitational manipulation had become so sophisticated that he maintained dozens of small fields throughout the complex, ensuring that beings with different environmental needs could coexist comfortably in the same spaces. "That makes 237 children in the program," Cosmos noted, his deep voice carrying the same matter-of-fact tone he used when discussing the weather. "The engineering team says we'll need to expand the sleeping quarters again." Emma nodded seriously, already planning the logistics in her head. At 6 years old, she had unconsciously become the coordinator for the largest interspecies childcare operation in galactic history, simply because someone needed to remember which children had which needs and when. Sarah watched her daughter work with a mixture of pride and amazement. Emma didn't realize she was accomplishing something extraordinary. To her, this was simply how families functioned. She had never known a world where children from different species couldn't play together, couldn't communicate, couldn't love each other as siblings. "Mama," Emma said, looking up from her bottle-warming duties, "the new Void Dweller baby needs extra darkness in their sleeping area. Can we ask Cosmos to make a gravity well that bends light away from their corner?" "Of course, sweetheart," Sarah replied, still marveling at how casually her 6-year-old daughter discussed manipulating fundamental forces to accommodate alien physiology. "Why don't you ask him yourself?" Emma nodded and ran off to find Cosmos, chattering about photon deflection patterns with the same enthusiasm that other children might discuss their favorite toys. The transformation hadn't been limited to the palace. Reports arrived daily from worlds across the galaxy where the Terra Protocol was being implemented. Families who had adopted the simple principles of interspecies child-rearing were reporting unprecedented developmental success rates. On Centauri Prime, human children were learning crystalline mathematics that their parents couldn't comprehend. In the Andromedan Collective, alien infants were developing emotional intelligence that was revolutionizing their culture's approach to social interaction. Even the warlike Korthak Imperium was discovering that children raised with species diversity were becoming natural diplomats, rather than warriors. The galactic political landscape was shifting as these children grew up with fundamentally different assumptions about what was possible between species. Traditional barriers of communication, culture, and physiology were becoming irrelevant to a generation that had never experienced them as limitations. "It's remarkable," Thais commented during her daily briefing with Sarah. The Supreme Counselor had become something of a godmother to the entire palace family, and her reports to the sovereign now read more like family newsletters than diplomatic documents. "The children are solving problems that have stymied our greatest minds for centuries, and they don't even realize they're doing it," Sarah smiled. Watching Emma help a group of youngsters collaborate on building a structure that required fire shaping selective phasing, gravitational support, and crystalline mathematics. They're not solving problems, she corrected gently. They're just playing together. The solutions happen naturally when no one tells them something is impossible. That evening, as the complex settled into its quiet hours, Emma found herself in the original nursery with her 3 dragon siblings. Despite the expansion and the hundreds of new family members, this small room remained their special place. "Do you remember?" Emma asked, curled up between Zephyr and Luna while Cosmos provided a gentle anti-gravity field that made them all feel like they were floating on clouds. "When it was just us 4. I remember being scared," Zephyr admitted, his mature voice carrying traces of the frightened chirps he used to make. "I didn't know how to control my fire and everyone was afraid of me. I remember feeling like I didn't belong anywhere," Luna added, her scales shimmering with remembered sadness. "I couldn't stay solid long enough to really connect with anyone. I remember floating alone," Cosmos said quietly. "I could move things, but I couldn't touch anything that mattered." Emma considered this, her 6-year-old mind processing concepts that would challenge adult philosophers. "You weren't really alone, though. You had each other. You just needed someone to help you remember how to be together." The 3 dragonlings exchanged glances over their human sister's head. Even after all these years, Emma's simple wisdom could still surprise them. "What do you think will happen?" Luna asked, "when all the children we're helping grow up? When they have children of their own?" Emma smiled, the confident expression of someone who had never doubted that the universe was fundamentally a good place filled with possibilities. "They'll teach their children what we learned, that families don't have to look the same, that love works in any language, and that the best way to solve problems is to play together until you figure them out." As the 3 suns set over the palace, casting rainbow light through the crystal spires, 4 siblings settled into sleep, surrounded by the soft sounds of hundreds of children from across the galaxy, all dreaming peacefully under the same protective care. Emma's last conscious thought was a simple one. Tomorrow would bring new children who needed to learn that they weren't alone, that they were loved, and that their differences made them special rather than scary. It was, she thought drowsily, going to be a wonderful day. In the years that followed, historians would mark Emma's 6th birthday as the beginning of what they called the Harmonic Era, a period when interspecies cooperation reached levels that previous generations had thought impossible. They would study the political treaties, the economic partnerships, and the technological collaborations that emerged from children who had grown up believing that working together across species lines was natural and normal. But Emma, now a young woman helping to establish similar programs across the galaxy, always insisted that they had missed the point entirely. It was never about changing the galaxy, she would tell audiences of academics and diplomats who came to study the phenomenon. It was just about letting children love each other. Everything else happened because love is what it is, unlimited, creative, and absolutely determined to find a way. The royal dragonlings, now adults themselves and leaders in their own right, would nod in agreement. They had learned many things over the years: how to control their abilities, how to communicate across species, how to solve complex problems through cooperation. But the most important lesson had come from a tiny human infant who had seen them not as dangerous prodigies or diplomatic challenges, but simply as siblings who needed love. And that lesson would echo through the galaxy for generations to come.